welcome to another tutorial. In this tutorial, I will tell you about delegation in Power Apps. This is not a new concept, but people are confused about delegations. My name is Sanjay Prakash and I am giving training in Dynamics 365 and Power Platform in these days. And I'm also a Microsoft MVP in Dynamics Business Applications. So let's get started. So in this video, I'll tell you about delegations, right? So in general meaning, let us understand what delegation is. So delegation is the assignment of authority or work to another person. That means you have some work to do, but you don't want to do, rather you want to delegate or assign that work to another authorized or representative of yours. Okay, so delegation means giving your work to another person to do that task. This is the simple meaning, English meaning of delegation, right? Now what is the meaning of delegation in the context of Power Apps? So Microsoft says that delegation is where the expressiveness of Power Apps formulas meets the need to minimize data moving over the network. You know that Power Apps is more powerful because it is connecting to your server data, right? Now if it is small data in that data source, then it is okay. But what about millions of data that is stored in your data source? So Power Apps is smart enough to read only limited data to the Power Apps, and then the Power Apps work or run any task that is given to the Power Apps to do. For example, if you want to search, if Power Apps want to search something, it will pick up the limited data, let's say it is 500 or it is 1000. Then once the data will pulled to the Power Apps, then Power Apps will try to search, right? Now if there is more than 2000 or more than 5000 data exist in your data source, it is always a bad practice to pull all data from that server to the app, which will damage our performance and it will impact our performance of the app. That's why delegation come into picture, so that some operations or some functions your Power App will delegate to the data source to do that or to complete the task, right? Microsoft has already created this page to understand delegation details, right? If you go through this link, you can understand details, but in this video I have also combined the concept to make you more understandable. Now as you know that delegation is introduced to minimize the data moving over the network. So Microsoft Power Apps will not pick up or not pull all data that is part of your dataverse, rather it will pull some data, then it will process. But what about if you want to search something from a million of data, right? Let's say here, if you see, there are 20,000 records. This is my SharePoint, right? And here if you see, you will see there are 20,000 records, right? Now if I will search 20,000, if I want to search some country from this data set, so what it will do? Normally what happens, if you think, Power Apps will have to read all this data to the Power Apps, and in the Power Apps it will try to search the record, search the text or search the country from the data set 20,000 records. So you can understand how much overhead will be required, how much overhead or how much time it will require to the Power Apps to search that specific thing from that set of records, from the 20,000 records. It's 20,000, you can think of 50,000, you can think of millions of data, right? So it is not a best practice to read all the data set, millions of data, to the Power Apps unnecessarily. Rather the functionality, whether you want to search or filter or whatever, you can tell the data source, as you are pulling the data from data source to the Power Apps, the Power Apps can tell to the data source to do the task, rather than pulling all the data to the Power Apps. the data source itself will process your search functionality in the data source level, and the data and the return data or the result data will be displayed in the Power Apps, right? That's what the delegation is all about. So now you can ask me that is all data source supporting delegation? No, only some limited data sources are allow delegations. So most frequently the data sources that provide delegation is SharePoint and Dataverse, SQL Server, and Salesforce, right? Now let's say one more thing. What is the simple word of Power delegation then? So Power Apps will delegate the processing of data to the data source rather than moving the data to the app for processing locally. If it is below 500 or 1000, that is fine. It will read the data locally to the app, and it will process, or it will search, or whatever function you want to perform, that will do. But if there are millions of data, moving data over network to the Power Apps from the server is not a good practice. It will take much time to process to read the data and process on that records. That's why delegation come into picture, right? Now in pictorial presentation I can tell you. So by default the Power App will process your request. Let's say you want to display SharePoint records on the Power Apps. Now what it will do, it will read all the records from the SharePoint and it will display on the Power Apps. But in that records, if you want to search something, what it will do, the Power Apps will tell to the SharePoint that, hey SharePoint, can you do this task? Now as SharePoint supports delegation, SharePoint will do that. SharePoint will tell, yes, I can do that. So what is the meaning then? So whenever you search some text from this data source or records that is displaying in Power Apps, the searching functionality will be done by the data source level. So instead of downloading all the records from the SharePoint to the Power Apps, the SharePoint will take the search text and it will return, and it will search in the data source level, and it will return the chunks of data that is resulting the search result, right? Which will give the result after searching, right? That's why it will limit the data source through the network, because when you are calling a data source means network activity is running, right? Your SharePoint server is somewhere, your Power Apps is somewhere, so connecting data and transferring data through network is time consuming and costly. Now what if the data sources do not support delegation? There are many data sources which are not delegated. If you go to any Power Apps, if you go to File and Settings, and in the general, if you scroll down, you will see there is an option called as data row limit. This data row limit is 500 by default, but you can extend up to 2000. What does it mean? It means that if your data source is not supporting delegation, then only this much data can be processed. That means if your data source is not supporting delegation and you are trying to search some text from your records, from that data source records where we have more than 1000 records, then that 1000 record will not be processed for searching, rather it will process 500 records to search. So that you have to keep in mind, first thing. So if you want to change it, you can change it to 2000, but that is not resolving your case, right? If there will be more than 2000 records in the data source and your data source not supporting delegation? So anyway, you have to think twice while using non-delegatable data sources and non-delegatable functions, right? Now let us understand more. So this is the concept, right? Power Apps will ask the data source to do the task to perform. Instead of downloading all the records to the local Power Apps to search, the data source will be responsible to do the task, right? Now you have to keep a note that working with large data set requires using data sources and formulas that can be delegated, right? So if you are working on a large data set, you have to write down some formulas that are delegatable, right? If you write down any non-delegatable functions, then it will not be acted upon all the records that are part of data source. Rather, it will only process on the records which is the 500 limit, right, or 2000 limit that you have set in the Power Apps. So if there is small data, there is no question of delegation, right? If it is within 500 or within 2000 that you have set in Power Apps, then there is no issue. But if it is more than 2000, then delegation come into picture, and you have to think twice how to design your Power Apps formulas. Now these are the popular delegatable data sources. One is Dataverse, next SharePoint, then SQL Server and Salesforce, right? So all these data sources offers delegatable functions that you can use, right? And the last thing is what you need to consider while thinking about large data set. When you think about large data set, you have to think 4 things. One is whether the data source that you are connecting is delegatable or it supports delegation. If it is not supporting delegation, how to handle that functionality, search functionality or filter functionality or whatever, because that function will only act on 500 records or 2000 records, whatever you have set in the Power Apps settings, right? Otherwise, if you ignore that, then the filter condition or search condition will behave awkward, right? That may not include all the records, or if you are doing some aggregate functions, okay, there are 1000 records and maximum limit you have set 500, but if you want to calculate some average of something, then that may not include all the records because your data source is not supporting delegation, right? So you have to think work around or other way around. Next thing is functions. There are some functions which are not delegable, right? For example, although your data source is supporting delegation, some functions are not delegatable. So you have to write your functions in different ways so that it will be delegatable, right? I'll tell you some example. Next, operator. Although some functions are delegable, there are some operators which are not delegable. If you use in operator, that is also not delegable, right? Like some columns. If you are doing some search or filter with complex data types, like address data types, like that data types, then also that is not delegable. So 4 things you have to remember while thinking about dealing with large data sets. Let us go and work on some demo. Here you can see in the SharePoint I have more than 20,000 records, total 20,000 records, and here in the Power Apps I have set the limit 500, right? Let me update 500 and save it, right? So I have set the maximum data row limit as 500. That means if your data source is not delegatable, it will act on only the first 500 records, okay? Otherwise it will not work on other records. Here you can see it is 20,000 records, but as SharePoint allows delegation, so I can use some delegatable function to do this. But if there is other data sources available with 20,000, if you write down some formula, then it will only act on 500 records, right? Now let us take an example. So this is the 20,000 records in my SharePoint, and here I have taken a gallery, and in this gallery I have associated the SharePoint item, SharePoint list called as large data SP, and in this label I have taken the count of this gallery using count row gallery to dot all items. That means I want to display how many items this is displaying here. So if I run it, and this is the ID, right? row ID of the specific row in SharePoint, and by default it is 100. That means at one shot it is pulling 100 at a time. So if you scroll down, once the 100 is scrolled down, then you will see it changes to 200. That means every time in every page it is actually retrieving 100 at a time. So you can scroll down, and if you scroll down it will again increase to 300, right? So every time it picks up 100 records and display on the gallery, and which is a good thing, right? Why every data will be picked up which will unnecessary eat the bandwidth. Now 500 is returned. Next it will return 600, right? So like that, at last it will return 20,000 because I have maximum 20,000 records. I have just associated the table to the gallery. I have not I'm not doing any search or any functionality or any filters. I have just attached the data source to the gallery. So 1400, then I can scroll down and it is 1600, right? So it will load all 20,000 in my gallery when I will keep scrolling, right? Now it is 20,000. There is no other data. Maximum 20,000 records are there. So if you scroll down, it will go up to 20,000. Anyway, I don't want to go, but the point here is, you understand, whenever I have associated this table, SharePoint table, using connectors, it picked up all the data and displaying one by one with 100 at a time, right? So there is no problem here, right? It is connecting successfully. But what if I want to search something? So I have taken a search box here, okay, and this search box, whenever I will search something, I want to search all the items which belongs to the India as country, right? So what I have done, I will go to here and enable, comment this one and enable this second formula to show you, right? Now whenever I have used search and large data SP text input, so I am trying to search the text information that is given here from this data set, from the SharePoint, which matches to the field 1. Field 1 means country, right? Now if you run it, you will see it is giving 3 results only. Why it is giving 3 results? Because it is only processing 500 records. If you see, there is a error icon, there is a warning icon here. Can you see that? And it is telling me that delegation warning, the search part of this formula might not work correctly on the large data set, right? So if you see here on the field 1 also, it is giving some warning because field 1 is a complex data type in SharePoint. So if I want to change it something like this, so my intention is I want to search the text box data from this data set, right, which matches. So instead of search and this function, I can write down something like that in different way using filters. Let's say I will go here and use this one. I want to write this filter. So I want to filter the SharePoint data where starts with field 1 equal to text, right? Now let us see. I'll go here and write down India. Okay. Oh, it's not working. Let me go to another formula I have kept. Let's say this one. Let me comment this. I'll use this filter. Filter the data set where country equal to text input dot text, right? This is also searching the same thing. It is trying to filter the data set where country matches to the input text. If I'll run it, I can define here India. Now if you search here India, you will see 96 records are coming. Why? Because this filter functionality is searching searching from the 20,000 records, not 500 records. And you can see here the IDs, right? This is more than 500, right? That means Power Apps, that means this function is delegatable. This function, whatever I have written here, filter large data set and country equal to this is delegatable, means the Power Apps is telling to the SharePoint to do this filter. But in this case where I have written search large data set equal to this, what Power Apps is doing is, because this field 1 is not delegatable, SharePoint will deny to do this search functionality from data source level. So Power Apps will try to pick up the 500 records and try to search from these 500 records. That's why it will not pick up 20,000 records, right? So you have to think again whether if this is not delegatable, you have to think other way around, right? As I have given this one, right? So if above function is not delegatable, I can use this one, so which will give the same result, but it will act on the whole record set, but the above function will act on 500 records, right? Like that. There is another thing called as in operator. Although this filter large data set, the filter SharePoint data source and country equal to text box input dot text working fine, if you just use another operator called as in, then also it will give you delegation warning. Why it is giving? Because in is not delegable, right? That's why you can see here it is giving three records, and there is no record ID more than 500. Why? Because only it is accessing 500 records only, because it is not delegable. So you have to think twice that how you can write down the formula so that the data source will understand, yes, this is a delegable function and I have to perform that action, rather than telling the Power Apps to do the functionality. The data source will handle that, right? So if you are dealing with large data sources, always think twice and always think that how I can write formulas that are delegatable, so that data source will handle the functionalities or functions or operations, and the result will return. Okay, so in here to search something, I can use this one. I can use this one, right? Right, so it will return all the data, right? Whatever I have done here, I check. Oh, okay, not this one. So I want to write down this one, right? So it will return all data. So you understand how this delegation works and how you can write formula properly connecting to your SharePoint. You can also do a POC or test this by connecting to your SQL Server and Dataverse and Salesforce also. I will recommend you to go through this website, because Microsoft has already designed in Microsoft Dataverse what are the functions that are delegable. You can understand here in details. You can go one by one and check the delegatable concepts of all this SharePoint. SharePoint, you can see here, all these are filtering numbers is delegatable, but using sort for complex data types is not delegable. Like that you have to understand, then you design your Power FX or function for large data set interactions. Okay, so thank you for your time. I hope you understand what is the delegation all about, so that you can be careful while designing your app by connecting large data set. Thank you everyone. If you have not subscribed, please subscribe this channel. See you again. Bye.